Hello everyone, it's Farket here, and in this video I'm going to show you the damage of every weapon and even some structures in the forest. Now this was done using the PvP damage enabler that was added a few patches ago. If this is switched off in multiplayer, anytime you get hit by another player with a weapon, it only does 5 damage. Though with it switched on, you get the full damage of that weapon. Now I did this with Frederick and Dexium, they're both patrons, they helped me do this, and it was very boring testing this stuff, especially with upgrades, but I'm not going to cover upgrades in this one because it's too complex. So how we did it was that we both had ultimate cheat menu. One of us would hit the other one with a weapon and determine how much damage it did. We didn't take into account strength at first, so we boosted strength up to 99 using the ultimate cheat menu and locked it into place because we were doing it on hard survival.
Right in the dick.
If you're ever going to do these tests, keep in mind that strength will fluctuate on hard survival, but it's static on normal and hard. Now there was no difference in damage between normal, hard, and hard survival except for fire damage. Another thing I needed to keep in mind when testing this was if I was infected. If you get infected, it lowers your strength, which reduces your melee damage. Strength has no effect on ranged weapons. So the damage you're seeing here for ranged weapons is the same at 20 strength or at 99 strength.
I'm gonna bone ya.
At 99 strength, you get just over 70% more damage. And you start with 20 strength, which works out to be about 14.3% more damage. But remember, your strength can go lower than 20 on hard survival. There are some other factors involved in this, which I'll mention along the way. I'm going to cover fire damage at the end because it's more complex. Now the first lot does 0 damage. That includes the noose trap, toy parts, and repair hammer. Now it does include the Molotov when it's unlit and thrown on normal mode and hard mode. On hard survival, it does 5 damage. I don't know why it's that way, but it is. Now I wasn't able to test the toy when it's fully completed, though I know that does damage because I killed an Armsy with it one time in Season 5. The next items are all the heads, animal heads, mutant heads, as well as the arm, leg, bone, and meats. They only do 2 damage. Next items are the ones that do 5 damage. That's a Molotov on hard survival as mentioned before, a small rock, and the slingshot. This is why they really don't kill enemies, though it's good at provoking them. Next are the items that do 8 damage. That includes the stick, tennis racket, and the upgraded stick. The stick and upgraded stick actually do the exact same amount of damage. Now, just for reference, when you got 20 strength, these only do 5 damage, but with 99 strength, they'll do 8. Next is the chainsaw, and that does 11 damage. Even with 20 strength, you'll still do 11 damage. Strength doesn't affect the damage on a chainsaw. But remember, that's 11 damage per tick, and the chainsaw does tick quite fast. So it's a fairly good weapon at the beginning, but once you get more strength, there are better weapons. Next is the turtle shell and the weak spear. They both do 12 damage. Now this doesn't affect the weak spear's throw damage. That's much higher, and you'll see later on in the video. Next are the items that do 17 damage. That includes the rock and climbing axe. Now keep in mind, that's just a normal rock. That's not the upgraded rock. Next are the items that do 21 damage. That includes the crafted bow with normal arrows and poison arrows, as well as the machete and plain axe. Now, poison arrows are listed here because they had no effect on another player, though if you shoot mutants, it does definitely damage them. This is one of those variables I mentioned that were going to be different. So if you're doing PvP, don't use poison arrows because they don't increase the damage at all. Now, the machete, originally I thought would have the same damage as a katana. It used to, but I think the damage has been nerfed to account for the upgrades it can receive. Not a big deal. It can still potentially do much more damage than the katana. Now, the 24 damage items is just the crafted bow with bone arrows, which means with crafted bows, bone arrows do 3 more damage than normal arrows, which works out to be about 10%, so it's not high. What causes 25 damage is the katana, which gives you 4 more damage than the machete, as well as the plain axe. And the catapult. Now, the catapult does 25 damage against another player no matter what you hit him with. If you hit him with 3 bombs, it will do 25 damage. I don't know why it's like this. I think you could safely ignore this, though keep it in mind for PvP and multiplayer. Though against mutants and other things, it's always going to do a lot more damage. For 27 damage, there's only one item, and that is the crafted axe. This is a good example of a weapon you need to take into account of other variables such as its range, its speed, etc. Because the crafted axe has terrible speed. It is probably the worst weapon in the game, but that's just my opinion. But that's also a lot based on stats. The 29 damage items are the rusty axe, skull, upgraded spear, and an incendiary spear. Now keep in mind the skull is not a very good weapon because it swings slow and you can't block with it. Whereas the rusty axe, it swings slow, but you can block with it. I don't know if you're going to attack an enemy with a skull now. That's up to you. As for the spears, that's only stabbing damage, which is quite high. For reference, the weak spear does 12 damage, whereas these spears do 29, so almost 3 times as much. I'd say more like 2.5. The items that do 23 damage are the crafted bow with modern arrows and the modern bow with normal or poison arrows. Remember that poison arrows have no effect on players, so this is what this is referencing. What this basically means is that the modern bow will do 33 damage with the most basic arrow compared to the crafted bow with the highest damaging arrow. Though this doesn't take into account headshot damage, which kills every cannibal instantly when you hit them in the head, no matter what you shoot them with. And as mentioned previously before, it doesn't take into account speed, velocity, all that sort of stuff. So this doesn't automatically mean that the modern bow is better than the crafted bow. I have a bit of experience in this, and I personally prefer the crafted bow over the modern bow, though everyone's different. Next are the items that do 34 damage. That includes the modern axe, head, upgraded rock, and crafted club. Now the modern axe and the crafted club are very similar to each other, though where the modern axe shines better is that it's actually faster. That's what makes it a bit better than the crafted club. As for the upgraded rock and head, you can't block with those. They're really missing out there. Though it would be funny to beat someone to death with a head, especially if it was the head of a former loved one of the cannibal that you're killing. Still a better love story than Twilight. Do people actually use those memes anymore? Next is the traps. They all do 35 damage. Now that's towards a player. They do much higher damage towards mutants and cannibals. They'll one-shot all cannibals. On normal mode, they'll one-shot a mutant. Though on hard and hard survival, you'll need 2 hits from most of them. Though if it's a girl mutant or a worm mutant, it's going to be different. Just so you know, I've tested the damage on these things before. They all do the exact same damage against enemies. So you just got to pick your preference. For me, it's the deadfall trap because it's cheap and I'm a tight ass. Next is the item that does 37 damage, which is a modern bow with bone arrows. I haven't got anything more to say here. At 38 damage is the highest damaging melee weapon in the game, which is the club. This doesn't necessarily make it better than the modern axe and the crafted club. Even though they do 4 less damage, the club is slow as hell to swing. Though still good to know if you want a real heavy hitter. Now we're really stepping up in damage here. Next is the modern bow with modern arrows, and that does 52 damage. For reference, with bone arrows, it does 37 damage. And with normal crafted arrows, it does 33 damage. So the damage with modern arrows on the modern bow is a lot. Though as mentioned, if you get them in the head, the damage doesn't really matter. Next is the spears. It doesn't matter if it's an upgraded or weak spear. It's going to do 60 damage regardless. So why spears are very effective for hunting deer, crocodiles, boar, and Amy Schumer. This is why I always say use your weak spears for throwing, because it does the exact same damage. Plus with the spear bag, you can carry 5 weak spears. So if you miss a lot like I do, you got extra ammunition to throw. Now this doesn't include the incendiary spear because its damage is much higher. Next is dynamite, bombs, sticky bombs, head bombs, and the flintlock pistol. These all did 75 damage. Now I'd say the flintlock pistol's damage is accurate against enemies, though the bomb damage is not accurate, considering one of these bombs can completely blow a cannibal to pieces. So I'd take their damage with a grain of salt. From doing these videos, it's possible that there's like armor types, similar to what works in real-time strategy games. So you got building armor and that type of stuff. It might be just different types of health, building health, enemy health, player health, etc. What the difference in these bombs are is its explosive radius. The dynamite actually has the highest. The bomb and the head bombs seem to have the exact same. This is why I've always liked dynamite, because of its large blast radius. And also, you don't have to craft it to get it, and it respawns in most places. And the last weapon before moving on to fire damage is the crossbow. This does 82 damage, which is the highest damage without fire in the game. So it does do more damage than the flintlock pistol. It does 7 more damage. I don't know what the reload times are like. I think they're about the same, but I've never liked the flintlock pistol. I found it harder to aim with. This is much easier to aim with. It only takes crossbow bolts, this one, and you can only carry 10 of them at a time at this current state. Now this is where it gets a bit more complex, as I'm going to be talking about fire damage. Now fire damage works on this. It ticks 4 times, and the damage it does is dependent on the difficulty. On normal and hard mode, it does 8 damage per tick for 4 ticks, which means it does 32 damage. That's against players in normal and hard mode. But keep in mind, in hard and hard survival, enemies take 66% less damage from fire. This is why if you watch my playthroughs, I don't use fire on many enemies, because the damage it does is really low, and fire becomes better at stunning rather than actually damaging them. However, if you're on normal mode, use as much fire as you can, because they're going to take a lot more damage. They'll take more than 32, I believe. But it's hard to say, because I don't have the enemy's health points available. However, if we apply the hard survival damage towards players, it does 80 damage to them. Each tick does 20 damage for 4 ticks, which is 80 damage. Now going on to the crafted bow with fire arrows, it will do 53 damage on normal and hard mode. So you'll get damage with the initial arrow, which would do 21 damage, and then 8 damage for 4 ticks, which brings it up to 53. Though on hard survival, it will do 103 damage. Now with the modern bow, on normal and hard mode with a fire arrow, it will do 65 damage. On hard survival, it will do 113. And finally, for the most lethal way of killing another player, that's the incendiary spear. On normal mode, it will do 92 damage if you actually hit the player, with the spear. Though you could miss them and just hit them with the fire, that way they'll still take the fire damage. 60 damage from the spear, you really want to hit them with that, and the 32 damage from the fire. On hard survival, if you directly hit a player with an incendiary spear, they're going to take 140 damage. 60 damage from the thrown spear and 80 damage from the fire. If you're going to be using this for PvP, make sure you have armor on, because if you get caught on fire, it's going to mess you up. Also in the video, the Ultimate Multiplayer Guide, I mentioned that PvP damage, even with it switched off, if you get hit by fire from another player, you're going to take full damage of that. Fire is completely irrelevant to PvP damage. So if you got hit by a crafted bow with a fire arrow, you're going to take the 5 damage from the arrow if the PvP mode is turned off, but you're going to take the full fire damage, which is 32. Or if you're in hard survival, it's 80, which means that one arrow on hard survival with PvP damage on from a player will kill you, unless you have armor. And for love of God, do not have stealth armor on, because that stuff burns off you much quicker than lizard armor, bone armor, and mutant armor. There is something to that, though I haven't done it because I need to test it a bit more. How fire damage works is that during those 4 ticks, you can't apply fire damage again. It won't reset the counter. So for instance, if you get hit by a fire arrow and you're ticking and you're on the last tick and you get hit by another fire arrow, you're just going to take damage. You're not going to restart the fire counter. This is why when you're fighting enemies, you need to wait till they're not on fire again and then shoot them with fire again, if that makes sense. Probably an easy way I could explain this is with the spray can. If you spray them with just one tss, like that, I don't know if that's the right noise, tss, or maybe it's a bit more like this, it's going to set them on fire. You don't need to keep holding it down. It's not going to do anything. So for instance, you're surrounded by 3 enemies, give them a quick spray and then switch to another weapon and keep hitting them. I'll put this toy down. I hope I explained that well. I might have to do an independent video on it. When it gets complicated like this, I'm often not the best at explaining it, but hopefully you understand. Things like here will apply fire damage, but won't keep adding it. So for instance, you get it by flare. On hard survival, you're going to take 80 damage, right? But if you're standing on a leaf pile trap and after you've taken the 4 ticks of damage, which would be 80 on hard survival, if you're still standing on it, the counter's going to reset. You're going to put yourself back on fire again. So you're going to take another 80 damage. If you get caught on fire by like a basic fire pit or a bonfire or a leaf pile trap, don't stand in it. God's sake. I'm not your mother, though I can be your daddy. It was difficult to work out fire damage once it goes over 100 because 2 things happen. You can't survive under that amount of health, and also the adrenaline rush effect, which I cover in my 5 hidden survival features video, which I'll put a link in the video for. Basically, once you take a hit that will take you under 0 health, it will trigger and it will keep you at 1 hit point. This is why a lot of the time you'll have almost no health and you get hit, but you'll survive. That's when adrenaline rush is triggering. So keep in mind with fire damage, it's ticking. So if you're onto the 2nd tick and it takes you and activates adrenaline rush, you've still got 2 ticks to go. So unless you put armor on, you're dead. So basically, if you're ever going to do PvP and you want to kill another player, which is obviously the point of PvP, use fire. It's going to mess them up. Though remember, you really want to keep armor on. Not the warm suit, that doesn't count as armor. You want to keep bone armor on, lizard armor, or mutant armor. Mutant armor is definitely the preferred method. It negates a lot of the damage. How it basically works is it works like health. So a mutant armor will give you 40 armor. So 2 pieces of mutant armor on hard survival will negate the 80 damage that fire does. And also when you're trying to kill another player, keep in mind that they've got adrenaline rush, but you've also got it too. And remember, there's a cooldown for it. It's 2 minutes. So if your adrenaline rush is being triggered, you got 2 minutes until you can have it again. Now I'm probably going into PvP too much a bit here, but this is where I recorded most of the stuff. Now remember, this isn't a 100% accurate guide for damage against enemies. Most of them are correct, though fire damage is more complex because they take less damage in hard and hard survival mode. But you take more damage in hard survival mode, but you don't take more damage in hard and normal mode. And they take full fire damage in normal mode, so it's quite complex. As mentioned, things like the catapult and explosives, those things are just too difficult to test. They obviously do more damage to enemies. Now there's one thing I want to address in this, and that's the katana doing 25 damage. Now originally I said that the modern axe was capable of doing 3 times more damage. I'm not sure where this inaccuracies come from. I don't think it's a fault in my testing. It might be that the katana might have had a boost in damage over time. I don't know. It hasn't been mentioned. But the modern axe does 34 damage. And as a pro tip, the max damage you can get out of the modern axe is 50 damage. And that's with 15 glass and 15 teeth. Anyway, hopefully I didn't confuse you too much and this makes sense. If you have any questions, make sure you leave them in the comments and I'll try to get to them. Anyway, if you like this video, make sure you like and subscribe. Cheers.